You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, Republican James Comer went on Fox and Friends to state that he took calls from county attorneys in Kentucky and Tennessee who want to go after the Bidens in retaliation for Trump's indictment. Here's that clip.
And I'll tell you one of the things that I don't think's been picked up a lot that's going to be a problem. And I had two calls yesterday, one from a county attorney in Kentucky and one from a county attorney in Tennessee. They were Republican, obviously. Both states are heavily Republican. They want to know if there are ways they can go after the Bidens now. And they've opened up a can of worms. They've set precedents now that we can't go back on.
All right, so Glenn, a few questions here. But first, can local officials do this? Like, could we see a wave of prosecution efforts against Democrats?
Only if they are corrupt, only if they ignore their oath of office and the rules of ethics that guide all attorneys, private attorneys, public attorneys, prosecutors, defense counsel. I mean, this is about as dangerous and frankly as despicable as it gets from not just my perspective as a former career prosecutor, but I think all honest and ethical attorneys in the practice of law will look at this and will be repelled. I mean, if this reporting by Comer is accurate, right, and that's a big if, for county attorneys, those are prosecutors reportedly in Tennessee and Kentucky saying, you know what, a Republican former president has been indicted. Can we go after the Bidens? Can we prosecute the Bidens? Not, we have a suspicion that there may be crime in our jurisdiction, and somehow the Bidens may be responsible, and we're going to need to open an investigation. No, can we go after the Bidens as naked political retaliation? I mean, this is about as dangerous as it gets, Brian, and this really is because the rule of law has sort of laid dormant for so long when it comes to holding accountable high government officials who are involved in crime, including members of Congress who committed the crime of, for example, contempt of Congress by violating lawfully issued congressional subpoenas. You know, you reap what you sow. And I think this is why the Comers of the world and the Jim Jordans and the Kevin McCarthys are feeling so emboldened that the rules and the law and the ethics of the legal practice just don't matter to them anymore.
Yeah, just completely a conclusion in search of evidence. Glenn, what can happen to these officials if they drum up what are clearly retaliatory charges? Like, are DAs and county attorneys basically beholden to the same rules that regular attorneys are when it comes to upholding the law? And could they be subject to the same penalties, including disbarment or sanctions?
Absolutely. County attorneys, district attorneys, states attorneys, Commonwealth's attorneys, federal prosecutors, local prosecutors, we are all bound by the rules of ethics of our respective jurisdictions, depending on what state bar we are a member of. So, you know, here's what should happen. So these county attorneys in Tennessee and Kentucky, according to Comer, who want to engage in nakedly sort of political retaliatory prosecutions of Democrats, should be investigated. They should be referred to their state bar. The first thing I think I would do if I were the state bar of Tennessee or of Kentucky, I would write Comer a letter and I would say, we are insisting that you identify to us the county attorneys that contacted you and said they want to engage in political retaliatory prosecutions because we have opened a bar council investigation. We need to get to the bottom of it because these attorneys may be looking at sanctions. They may be looking at disbarment. This is a gross abuse of position and power by county attorneys.
Can somebody request that? Like, because clearly, some of these Republican aligned attorneys aren't going to do that. But if there is a Democrat in that state, for example, that's part of the Kentucky bar, part of the Tennessee bar, could they request that something like that be done?
Anybody can make a complaint to bar counsel. And so, you know what, I think the tricky part right now is identifying from Comer who these, again, assuming Comer is telling the truth.
We might find out at the end of the day that he was just completely full of shit, and this is just a shtick that he puts on for Fox and Friends.
It is. It may very well be a shtick. And let's play things out. Let's say people try to question him about these assertions that county attorneys are trying to now go after the Bidens. What will he claim? Speech and debate clause protection. You can't ask me such things. Now, that will be a bogus claim, but the fact of the matter is, if the rule of law doesn't assert itself, so, let me use as an example, Jim Jordan, who was served it was a lawfully issued congressional subpoena that required him to appear and testify. When he defied that subpoena, Brian, he committed a crime, a federal crime, contempt of Congress. And because he hasn't been held accountable for that crime, he and his fellow Republicans feel emboldened. They feel unconstrained by the law, by the rules of ethics, by any sort of sense of responsible governing. And that is why we find ourselves where we find ourselves.
Yeah. Biden and his family have hardly stepped foot in Kentucky or Tennessee, much less committed a crime there. Is there a world in which a prosecutor there still could, regardless, entangle him in some misguided political litigation?
Not ethically. I mean, listen, if you have unethical prosecutors willing to break the law, willing to ignore the ethical rules of their practice,
yeah, so let's operate under that assumption, because we know that Biden has not committed a crime in Kentucky or Tennessee, and so this would let's operate, in this scenario under the assumption that it would be an unethical litigatory effort.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly could. I mean, if you have prosecutors that are rogue prosecutors that are willing to open investigations on something other than what we call adequate predication, you need enough evidence that, one, a crime has been committed, and two, you have some sense of who may have committed it in order to open an investigation. Now, if these district attorneys or these county attorneys in Kentucky, in Tennessee, want to just go rogue, well, they could certainly issue subpoenas based on absolutely no evidence. Heck, they could present false testimony to a grand jury. They could secure a conviction of Joe Biden or some other, Democrat. And, and this is what happens if the rule of law is not applied equally, and it hasn't been applied equally.
To that point, on this idea of a lot of Republicans are going to listen to what you just said and say, well, it hasn't been applied because you just indicted Donald Trump. So, a lot of them are focusing on the fact that Trump was indicted as if it's being done independent of any cause. So just for posterity here, what do you say to those Trump supporters out there who claim that this indictment was unfounded or just the result of some, political effort, some political prosecution?
Yeah. Defendant Trump was indicted on 34 felony counts because at least 16 citizens sitting as grand jurors in New York believe there was evidence of probable cause that he committed those 34 felonies. That's why Donald Trump was indicted. There is no just because a Republican's been indicted, we need to indict a Democrat. That's not the way the rule of law works. And let's take a step back, Brian. Let's remember, members of the judiciary, an independent and co-equal branch of government, have said Donald Trump committed crimes. You have a federal judge in California who made a finding by a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. That's a higher evidentiary standard than is required to arrest or indict someone. Judge David Carter found that Donald Trump committed 2 federal felonies, a conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstructing a congressional proceeding. So these, and I understand, I don't mean to mix criminal apples and oranges, federal crimes of Donald Trump and state crimes of Donald Trump. The reality is he has committed both. A grand jury in New York found there was probable cause to believe he committed crimes. A federal judge in California found there was a preponderance of the evidence that he committed crimes. So these determinations to indict people are not divorced from evidence.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly put.
So let me ask you, what do you think are the political implications of what feels like some runaway rogue Republicans now trying to gin up charges against the Bidens.
Yeah, I think that if these Republicans think that this is in any way going to redound to their benefit, they've completely lost the plot. If you look and see where the priorities of, a lot of these Democrats who are in office right now, they are to help the people that actually elected them. And look what's happening in Wisconsin right now. Democrats just won this state Supreme Court race, and that's going to allow them to finally overturn that 1849 abortion ban. It's going to allow them to fix those completely gerrymandered maps. You look what's happening in Michigan right now, where they just repealed this 1931 abortion ban. And they've also eliminated the right to work laws. You look in California, they're going to manufacture insulin at the state level. So you have all of these legislators on the Democratic side who are doing things to actually serve the constituents who elected them. And yet still on the Republican side, all of their efforts, all of their time and energy is going toward saving, their dear leader, Donald Trump. And I think that there's going to come a point when I don't know how many times the voters have to tell them, like they did in 2018, in 2020, in 2022, that this guy is an albatross around their necks, and they keep stepping on rakes in order to help Donald Trump, and all the while they're just losing more and more voters. And that's not to say that there are, that this is completely. There are plenty of Trump supporters out there, but by and large, especially if you want to reach these voters in swing states, Republicans have pretty much allowed them to fall by the wayside because they are showing constantly that they don't care about doing anything in government other than just, sticking out their necks for Donald Trump. And meanwhile, you got Democrats delivering in swing states across the country. You've got Democrats delivering in blue states across the country. You've got Democrats electing people in states that Democrats have no right to be elected in, because they are seeing that when you just run these extremists, run these people whose entire identity is predicated on the whole MAGA agenda, that it's the voters who aren't buying it. And so, look, you'll have these James Comers who are going to go on because they want to, appeal to the Fox and Friends viewership, the base. But the more you appeal just to the base, the more you are separating yourselves from those regular voters out there whose entire day is not predicated on what Donald Trump is feeling at that moment. And so, look, we've said it before and I'll say it again. Don't interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. But, if James Comer wants to come on, if any of these people want to come on and just overtly say how they're going to abuse the judicial system, all in deference to Donald Trump, more power to them. It's not going to go anywhere. But what it is going to do is push all those voters that they need to get away.
Well, let me say, Brian, I appreciate that. I'm always bringing the gloom and doom, and I'm talking about the erosion of the rule of law and how we're in such deep trouble. I'm glad you can refocus on some of the accomplishments across the nation of the Democrats, because I don't think we focus on that enough. We're always focused on the damage that the Republicans are doing to the rule of law. And so it is good to remind everybody about all of the positive things that are being accomplished by Democrats.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I know a lot of our efforts are spent screaming into the void about all the bad shit that's happening, but a lot of good stuff does happen. And, if you look at a state like Michigan, where Democrats have a trifecta in that state for the first time in almost 4 decades, and look at all of the progress that's been made in just a short amount of time, that kind of gives that moment of validation for all the hard work and the volunteering and all of those godforsaken donation text messages that everybody's getting. So with that said, Glenn, I do want to switch gears here to Mike Pence. We just had an announcement that Mike Pence won't be appealing the decision that would compel him to testify. So first off, are you surprised that Pence opted not to appeal this decision? And why do you think that was?
Yeah, given that Mike Pence is one of the smallest men in America, I'm a little bit surprised he didn't continue to play this out. Look, he's been playing to Donald Trump's base, although, again, I'm not a political expert, but that seems like a miscalculation.
It doesn't seem like there's too much of a constituency for Mike Pence and the Hang Mike Pence party.
Yeah. So it seems to me that he could have gone either way. He could have continued to play it out and sort of run all the way up to the Supreme Court, only to be rejected at every turn, which was the likely result if he did pursue an appeal. So listen, I'm glad he's given up the ghost. I'm glad he will now be compelled to go into the grand jury because, Brian, he has some of the most sharply incriminating direct evidence, not circumstantial evidence, direct evidence out of the mouth of the orange horse himself, Donald Trump, because Donald Trump waged just a relentless pressure campaign on Mike Pence to try to get Mike Pence to violate the law, to do the wrong thing, to refuse to certify Joe Biden's win. So the fact that Mike Pence is about to go into the grand jury and sharply incriminate Donald Trump is, I think, a real win for the rule of law.
Is this as close to Trump that Jack Smith will get?
Jack Smith has shown himself to be a determined justice warrior. Jack Smith not only has succeeded in obtaining Mike Pence's testimony, he will succeed, I predict, in getting Mark Meadows' testimony. That will be probably even more valuable, or at least equally valuable, as Mike Pence's testimony is. The reason I'm so confident of that is because I think Mark Meadows has criminal exposure. And frankly, at the end of the day, that can even make it a little bit easier to grab hold of somebody and ultimately obtain their testimony. Because one, if Mark Meadows goes into the grand jury and pleads the fifth, then that gives Jack Smith a real opportunity. He can say, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to charge you for your crimes, and you're going to have a decision to make. Do you want to sit at counsel table at the end of the day as a co-defendant of Donald Trump, or do you want to plead guilty to the crimes you committed? Maybe we'll give you a reduced plea or a reduced sentence, and you will be required to testify truthfully about all of the crimes of Donald Trump. What are you going to do? I'll tell you, Brian, I have been in that position with defendants who I wanted to convert into cooperating witnesses more times than I can count. More often than not, these folks want to cut their criminal exposure. They break, they come on board, and they give up the bigger fish. That is, frankly, I think, the way I see Mark Meadows going. Jack Smith is going to get the testimony of everybody he sets his sights on. That seems to be his MO.
Let's finish off with this. Will the fact that Mike Pence isn't tying this up in unnecessary appeals, is that going to allow a potential indictment by Jack Smith to get handed down sooner?
Sooner rather than later. Now, what does sooner mean? These days, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Of course, we had, an imminent charging decision announced by Fani Willis down in Georgia, I think months ago now. So I think, as impatient as we are, we have to wait until a Jack Smith does all of the investigation, presents all of the evidence to the grand jury he believes is necessary before he actually asks a grand jury to vote out charges against Donald Trump. Whether that's weeks from now, months from now, I think it's impossible for any of us to know.
Yeah, but I do want to just kind of reiterate the fact that that is the whole point of this. I mean, we're not going toward just a brick wall here at the end of this. There is an indictment at the end of this. That's why Jack Smith is doing all of this. So I know that it's, frustrating for people to watch and kind of this endless process, but that is what's on the other side of this. So hopefully that helps temper some expectations, and that there is a point to all of this. So with that
There is
said,
a light at the end of the justice tunnel for sure.
Exactly. So with that said, for anybody watching, if you want to keep up on legal news, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.